Now, I'll say more about paper another time, but this is a paper I really like, and it comes in these, they're not really what they call block because it's only glued on one end. A watercolor block, an actual block, is usually glued on all four sides, and it has a little bit of an opening where you can separate. Yeah, here it's at the corners, you can see. I'm not too crazy about these because they cost a lot more and they don't really work as well as you would think given the extra cost. This is medical tape, which is something I prefer usually to, it's hard to get the beginning, but it tends to be more gentle than masking tape. But I give up on it right now, and I'll take masking tape because this paper can take it. And also, in this case, it's thicker. So instead of using clamps as I usually do, I'm going to take the time that I usually don't like to take to tape the four sides of this paper, because with wet into wet work, you end up with a lot of water. And I also like the looser look of just drawing with your pencil the edges, and then try to stay within them, which may or may not work. But I think for demonstration purposes, this will make things clearer. All right. So it's one of the great pleasures of painting, to remove the tape at the end, for me, who are not into making straight lines from my own devices. Okay, so I have this square. It's rough paper, but it's not as rough as some brands. I have my palette that has a lot of colors, and I am going to paint a wet into wet, a very simple landscape. Now, for wetting the paper, a brush like this is very good because it holds a lot of water. This is Princeton Neptune. It's flat, so you can more easily go back and forth, which is a good thing to do because it makes sure that the water is evenly distributed along the paper surface. And so if it's distributed evenly, it will also tend to dry more evenly, and then that makes the process preferable, I think, or I've read, and I seem to agree based on experience. Now, for actual painting, I'm not crazy about flat. So we're gonna work entirely wet into wet and without a previous drawing. So the beauty, one of the beauties of wet into wet is that you are already in the presence of water on the paper. And so you can go straight from the pans, right? Instead of mixing it onto a different palette, because you already have water here, so you don't have to worry so much about water. So let's imagine that the horizon line is here, and while it's wet I can add things. So let's say I want to vary a little bit the blue, so I started with cerulean, which is darker, but what if I want to put a little bit of ultramarine? Varied skies are pretty. And maybe even a little bit of cobalt violet, especially down here, a little bit here. And then let's imagine that down here I have a field of wheat. So I'm going to use my raw sienna which, because this is a Daniel Smith, they call it Monte Amiata Natural Sienna. It's drying already, you can tell, right? Wherever I haven't added, I can tell here at the edges, it's drying. But it's not dry, so as long as it's not dry, I can add. And of course, every time I add paint, I'm also adding water. So let's do some kind of lines of let's imagine this to be a more burnt, sunburnt row. Maybe warm it up with a little bit of yellow. And you know, it is a field of wheat, and in Italy they always have poppies. So I could do like tiny poppies, and I have pretty much neat paint here because I don't want it to get too big. And maybe with poppies comes a little bit of green. Again, I already have a lot of water, so I'm working entirely from my imagination here and memories. But how about down there? Let's have a row of trees in the background, and I don't want these trees to be like a straight green like that, so I'm going to mix the green with some burnt sienna, and start like that. Then I'll have greener here. And maybe not red. You can experiment, right? Because it's all wet, so you can lift it out or mix it to make it more your color. I think what I meant is a little bit of orange, maybe. But go back to green. And see, the edges are soft because your paper is wet. Isn't that lovely? It's just fun, and you can just keep going until you like it. And then if you're afraid there's a little bit too much paper, then what you may want to, too much water, you may want to take out your hair dryer, which, as I mentioned, I don't like. But sometimes I use it because if there is a lot of water. You can also do this. I'm using the thirsty brush, which means I rinse the brush, dry it as best I can, but it's still wet, obviously. And then that'll make it very absorbent. This can be a simple painting, and once it, I mean, you can play with it some more because here it's wet. I can do some little marks. I could add a little bit more yellow. It will dry lighter, so see, the sky is already too dry for me to do anything. It's not bone dry, but if I add paint now, it would be a mess. The rest is still wet enough that, let's say I want to emphasize the orange here, I still can, though it is beginning to create a bloom because what I'm adding has more water than what's already there. So if I don't like that, I can lift the water and add less wet paint. So I can even do little grass markings. Again, go easy on the water if you don't want it to just spread. And if you want to go deeper with your flowers or add some, now that it's drying, it will spread less. And there you go, a simple wet into wet landscape. I hope you'll try it and enjoy it. Oops, I almost forgot to show you what I call the most fun part, which is the careful removal of this. Always move outward, I learned. Because then if it does tear the paper, at least it tears the white paper and not the painted paper. Sometimes it might take, but this paper is pretty tough and the masking tape is pretty good. It's very satisfying to have the painting look almost like it's matted, you know? And it gives you a nice white space around it. And this one is actually, I'm not going to go with a second layer because the color stayed pretty intense because I used it in a very concentrated amount. I have some beautiful, what do you call these, blooms here. And some parts that dried faster than others look a little different, so you have variety. Something I might do is maybe put a little dark dot in the center of some of the poppies. Call these poppies too. Gives it a more finished look. Probably not something you want to do wet into wet unless it's already dry. But that's it. This is a fun way to do a simple landscape. Thank you.